What if I told you that the real reason your blood sugar is still high has almost nothing to do with sugar? Now, I know that sounds strange because most people have been told a very simple story, that your blood sugar is high because you eat too many carbohydrates. And on the surface, that explanation feels logical, feels clean, and it feels like it should work. But that explanation starts to fall apart the moment someone cuts carbs, eats less, exercises more, and still wakes up with blood sugar numbers that don't make sense. And if that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not failing. And you are responding exactly the way your physiology is designed to respond. You're just being given the wrong explanation. Before we go any further, if you want our step-by-step system that shows you exactly how to restore insulin sensitivity using food, movement, and daily habits, comment guide below and we'll send it to you so you can actually apply what you're about to learn instead of just hearing it once and moving on. Now, let's reframe this properly. High blood sugar is not really a carbohydrate problem. It's much better understood as a glucose traffic problem. And that traffic problem is usually being driven by three things happening at the same time. Glucose is not being pulled efficiently into your muscle, your liver is releasing more glucose than it should, and insulin signaling is impaired at the cellular level. So the goal is not to remove carbohydrates. The goal is to fix the system that handles them. Let's start at the root. Insulin resistance is not caused by carbohydrates. It is driven largely by fat accumulation inside your muscle and liver cells, which researchers call intramuscular fat and hepatic fat. And until you understand this, everything feels confusing because you're trying to fix the symptom instead of removing the cause. Think of insulin like a key and your cells like locks, because when everything is working properly, insulin shows up, the lock churns, and glucose flows out of your bloodstream and into your cells where it can be used for energy, which makes the whole system feel smooth, predictable, and controlled. But when fat builds up inside the cell, it's like jamming gum into the lock mechanism. The key is still there. Insulin is still being produced, but it doesn't churn properly anymore. And that's what we call insulin resistance. And once that happens, something very important shifts. You become carbohydrate intolerant, not because carbohydrates broke you, but because your cells can't respond the way they're supposed to. So now, when you eat carbohydrates, glucose enters your bloodstream exactly as it should, but it doesn't leave efficiently. And that's when blood sugar starts rising. Now, let's go one level deeper, because this is where most people finally start to see what's actually happening inside their body. Your body has a safe place to store fat, and that place is under your skin, subcutaneous fat, which is not perfect, but relatively stable and designed for long-term storage. The problem begins when that system becomes overwhelmed, because when more fat is entering your body than it can safely store, it starts to spill over into places it was never designed to be, inside your liver and inside your muscle cells. And that is what we call ectopic fat, which is the fat that directly drives insulin resistance. And it's not just sitting there passively. That fat actively interferes with your biology by producing signaling molecules like diacylglycerol and ceramides, which disrupt insulin signaling pathways. So now insulin shows up, but the message doesn't get through. And in simple terms, the system is trying to work, but the signal is blocked. And this explains something that confuses a lot of people. You can have high insulin levels and high blood sugar at the same time because your body is trying harder but not getting the result. Now, let's connect this to what you actually experience, because once you see this clearly, your numbers stop feeling random. Let's start with muscle. Your skeletal muscle is responsible for about 70 to 80% of glucose uptake after a meal, which means that when you eat carbohydrates, most of that glucose is supposed to go into your muscles. But if your muscle cells are filled with fat, they can't receive that glucose properly, so it stays in your bloodstream. And that's when people say carbs spike my blood sugar. But carbs aren't the problem. The destination is. Let's shift this into your liver, because this is where things start to feel especially confusing for most people, particularly when fasting glucose enters the picture. Overnight, while you're sleeping, your liver releases glucose into your bloodstream. That's normal, and it's how your brain gets fuel. But insulin is supposed to regulate that process by telling your liver liver when to slow down and when to stop. But when fat accumulates inside liver cells, that signal stops working properly. So your liver continues releasing glucose even when it shouldn't, which is why you can wake up with high blood sugar even if you did everything right the day before. And this is where frustration builds because it feels like nothing is working. But what's happening overnight has very little to do with willpower and everything to do with liver physiology. If you've been struggling with high fasting glucose, comment guide below and we'll send you the exact framework we use to calm the liver and bring those numbers down step by step. Now, let's talk about why this is happening in the first place, because this is where most advice completely misses the mark. Ectopic fat accumulation is driven by a mismatch between how much fat is entering your bloodstream and how much your body can process. And because fat is extremely easy to store, when that system becomes overloaded, it spills into organs. And one of the most consistent drivers of this process is high saturated fat intake, especially when combined with low movement. And what's important to understand is that this can happen faster than most people realize. Controlled metabolic studies show that increasing circulating fatty acids can induce insulin resistance rapidly, not over years or decades, but quickly. And here's something that surprises a lot of people. You can become insulin resistant without significant weight gain because your external appearance may not change much, but your internal physiology is changing. Now, layer in another factor, stress. Chronic stress raises cortisol, which increases fat release into the bloodstream and signals your liver to release more glucose. So now you have more fat entering your cells and more glucose entering your bloodstream at the same time, which is why someone can say, my diet is clean, but my numbers are worse, because the missing variable is stress physiology. For women, there's another layer, hormonal changes, because as estrogen declines, fat is more likely to shift toward visceral and ectopic storage, which directly impacts insulin sensitivity. Again, not random, physiology. Now let's address one of the biggest myths directly. Carbohydrates are not the cause of insulin resistance. Under normal conditions, glucose is used for energy or stored as glycogen. It is not automatically converted into harmful fat. And large observational studies consistently show that higher intake of whole fruit is associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. So when carbohydrates seem to cause problems, what you're actually seeing is carbohydrate intolerance caused by insulin resistance, not carbohydrate toxicity. And here's the hopeful part. As insulin sensitivity improves, carbohydrate tolerance comes back. We see this over and over again. People go from fearing fruit, avoiding rice, limiting potatoes, to eating high carbohydrate, whole food diets with stable blood sugar, not because the food changed, but because their physiology changed. Now, let's talk about how to start reversing this process, because this is where things become actionable. And we're going to start with the fastest lever first. Number one, move your body. Churn your muscles into glucose vacuums. When your muscles contract, they can pull glucose out of your bloodstream without needing insulin, which is incredibly powerful because insulin is the very signal that's impaired. So movement creates a second pathway, a side door, where glucose can enter the cell without relying on that broken signal. That's why something as simple as walking after meals works so well. And studies show that short walks after meals improve blood sugar more effectively than one longer walk done at a different time, because you're intercepting glucose as it rises. So here's what to do. Walk for 10 to 20 minutes after meals at a comfortable pace consistently, because this is one of the simplest and most effective ways to lower blood sugar in real time. Number two, build and use muscle. Increase your glucose storage capacity. Muscle is not just where insulin resistance happens. It's also one of the most powerful tools you have to reverse it, because muscle acts as a metabolic sink, meaning the more muscle you have, the more glucose your body can clear from the bloodstream and the more fat your body can burn, including the fat stored inside your cells. Resistance training improves insulin sensitivity even without significant weight loss, because this isn't about shrinking your body. It's about changing how your body processes fuel. Now, there's one more piece of this that determines whether insulin resistance actually improves at the root or whether you're just managing symptoms on the surface. Because movement opens the door for the glucose to leave the bloodstream, and muscle increases your capacity to store and use that glucose once it gets there. But neither of those remove the fat that's blocking the system in the first place. And that brings us to nutrition. Number three, change the internal environment. Remove remove the fat that's blocking insulin signaling. Because if fat inside the cell is what's interfering with insulin signaling, then the goal is not to avoid glucose. The goal is to create an internal environment where that fat can actually be reduced. And this is where most approaches go in the wrong direction, because they try to control blood sugar by removing carbohydrates instead of improving the body's ability to process them. A low-fat, plant-based, whole food approach works differently, because instead of restricting glucose, it restores insulin sensitivity by reducing the amount of fat entering the bloodstream while increasing fiber-rich whole foods that support metabolic function. So now you're lowering fat delivery into muscle and liver cells while at the same time improving insulin signaling and glucose handling, which means instead of adding more traffic to a congested system, you're actually clearing the blockage. And this is the part that feels counterintuitive at first, because when insulin resistance is high, carbohydrates can temporarily raise blood sugar more than expected. But that doesn't mean carbohydrates are the problem. It means the system handling them isn't working properly yet. The goal is not to prove that carbs are harmless today. The goal is to restore insulin sensitivity so your body becomes more carbohydrate tolerant over time. And this is exactly what we see over and over again. People come in afraid of fruit, avoiding rice, limiting potatoes, and as their insulin sensitivity improves, those same foods stop causing problems, not because the food changed, but because their physiology changed. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, but what does that actually look like in real life? What do I eat? How do I structure meals? What does a day actually look like? That's exactly why we created our free guide. So if you want our recipes, our exact meal structure, and the framework we use to help people reverse insulin resistance step by step, comment guide below and we'll send it to you. Because this is the piece most people are missing. Not more restriction, but the right structure. So when you zoom out and look at all three of these together, this is where things start to click. Movement opens the door. Muscle increases your storage capacity, and nutrition removes the blockage. And when all three are working together, the system starts correcting itself, because this isn't about hacking blood sugar. It's about fixing the system that controls it. And when that system starts working again, something really important happens. Blood sugar stops feeling unpredictable. Meals stop feeling like a risk. And for the first time, you're not reacting to numbers. You're actually understanding what's driving them, because insulin resistance is not random. It is not a failure, and it is not your fault. It's a physiological state, and physiological states can change. So if this gave you clarity and you want a step-by-step system to apply this in real life, comment guide below and we'll send you everything you need to get started. If this helped you, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And until next time, keep those carbs high and that A1C low.